Hello and welcome to today's Live on Web program, Megatrends in Trucking Technology. I'm Seth Clevenger, Managing Editor of Features at Transport Topics. In this show, we'll be taking a closer look at the IT side of trucking and how fleets are embracing technology to improve visibility and efficiency across their operations. One major trend we'll be discussing is the emergence of predictive analytics, which uses fleets' data to forecast what will happen in the future rather than simply examining what has already happened. We'll also take a look ahead at the future of trucking IT by exploring the potential uses for blockchain within the transportation industry. And we'll be discussing the expansion of remote diagnostics, the future of truck maintenance, and even the potential for virtual reality and augmented reality in trucking. Now, joining us here in the studio today to help answer all your questions is Jack Legler, Technical Director for ATA's Technology and Maintenance Council. Later on, we'll also hear from Peter Kovac, Director of Information Technology at Paper Transport, a Wisconsin-based truckload fleet that is taking its data analytics to the next level. We'll also take a deeper dive into blockchain with Tim Leonard, Chief Technology Officer at Trimble Transportation, which owns TNW Systems, PeopleNet, and several other trucking technology suppliers. As we get into this discussion, we also invite you to participate in today's program by emailing your questions or comments to share@ttnews.com. So Jack, to get started, let's go ahead and talk about the evolution of data analytics, right? Now, we've really come a long way from only using data to look at what happened in the past and assess what went wrong. Increasingly, companies today are using data to look forward and project. What are some examples that you've seen in the industry where the transportation industry is really using predictive analytics to look ahead?
Well, thanks for the invite, Seth. TMC is very happy to be here, and as well as myself. The topic of data analytics is just fascinating. We're going through a rapid expansion, both in capability, as far as sensor technologies, and pulling all the data together with the analytics, so that we're not, as you said, not looking just retrospectively after an event happens, but actually now being able to predict an event before it happens. Where this is paying off now is you're seeing increased route efficiencies, reduced maintenance cycles, reduced maintenance costs, better supervision of drivers and technicians.
Right. Those are a few examples that we see, and for another example, we had a recent conversation with Peter Kovac at Paper Transport, and this is a specific example of next level analytics, in this case looking at forward-looking ETAs for more precise arrival times. So let's go ahead and play that clip and hear what Paper Transport is doing with forward-looking ETAs. Yeah, and Pete, one of the big emerging trends we've seen in trucking technology in recent years has been the use of predictive analytics. Using data not just to see what has happened in the past, but to also try to use this to predict what's likely to happen in the future. And Paper Transport is actually a really good example of this with some of the work you've been doing on forward-looking ETAs for more precise estimates on arrival time. So Pete, could you go ahead and give us a little bit of an example and an overview of exactly what you're doing in this area at Paper Transport?
For sure. And for me, what I have as a litmus test is predictive analytics being taking the data that you have accumulated, manipulating that, and then making those projections forward. And the big differentiator for that is so that way, as you execute more and more, as you have more and more data build up, those trends, those predictions become even better as that data builds. So, what we have done is taken that minute-by-minute GPS information, which everybody gets, and build out individual route lines for all of our drivers, and then combine all of that, aggregate all of that, and now we start understanding what is going to be the average for those drivers as to how long it's going to take to actually execute. And again, as we execute more and more of those routes, that information gets tighter and tighter.
Okay, and obviously this will help tremendously with planning, right? So when you're looking at your network, looking at opportunities to pick up loads, this puts you in a position where you can make much better decisions, right?
For sure, and at the simplest level, you have that feedback loop between the driver and the driver manager. We take that information and provide that same level of information that the driver manager is seeing all the way back to the driver. So, at the simplest sense, we have that conversation going on, and setting those expectations as to what can actually be done. It's great that we have this projected ETA, but at the end of the day, we need that conversation and a unified understanding as to what will be executed. So that way the appointment items are set appropriately and that our customers are communicated with appropriately.
Sure. And you think, you know, in the modern trucking industry, I mean, forward visibility, I get the sense, is just becoming more and more important. You guys are staying ahead of the curve on that. But you know, what are you hearing from your shippers? What do you think, you know, is out there in terms of shipper expectations for knowing, you know, precise times, you know, when a truck's going to arrive, and just knowing exactly where their freight is?
Yeah. At this point, the shipper's mindset is that transparency, wanting that full picture, that full detailed view as to what's actually happening with a load. And we've seen that with you know, the visibility tools that have been coming onto the market, you know, 4Kites or 10-4, where the shippers want that aggregated information coming in from the carriers. You know, at this point, we're already providing GPS information every 10 to 15 minutes coming into their system, so that way they see exactly where that truck's at. And then with that, providing those regularly updated ETAs back into the system as well has been kind of a new development for us.
Okay.
So having those updated projections being not only shown to our drivers or driver managers, but ultimately to our shippers and finally their customers.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, it's everybody is expecting that same consumer experience in the transportation world.
All right. Yeah, and you know, with these forward-looking ETAs, I mean, this is something that Paper Transport is developing on a proprietary basis. So you guys are investing in this. You see a real need for this as a competitive advantage. You know, why is this such an important technology for you guys to pursue? Why invest so much into this IT foundation for your business?
And that's truly what it is for us, and how we viewed it as a foundational piece of data that we needed to understand. We knew where our drivers, were going from, Wisconsin to Ohio, but we had no idea where the drivers will be. Show me all the drivers in Chicago at 11 a.m. tomorrow, right? We needed to understand where will we be at every point in the day moving forward as we plan it out. So not only will that give us visibility into empties along the route line or maintenance facilities that they can drop by, but then we have that hours of service understanding with it to say, that's great that they're moving past it, but do they actually have the time to stop? So combining all that information so that way all of our business units, all of our departments can really work together and have that single view as to what will be happening with that driver.
Okay. Well, great. Maybe, can you give me any, before we leave this topic, what might be the next step for you guys in this, relatively recent rollout of forward-looking ETAs? What's the opportunity for growth? What's the opportunity to expand on that in the future that you're looking at?
I mean, ultimately, where our long-term jump into is now we know where the drivers will be and where our holes in our network will be. We really want to start plugging in those holes and having to say we need a load from A to B right during this time frame, and that's really where we want to go with that in an automated means.
All right, welcome back. So Jack, and Pete, we appreciate you taking the time, and Jack, I wanted to get your thoughts on the potential for forward-looking ETAs for better asset utilization in the trucking industry.
Predicting our time of arrival more accurately is not just nice to have, it's a gotta have. The industry is being driven more and more by customer expectations. Now, shippers and end consumers. Consumers want their goods today because they're not going to brick and mortar stores anymore. They're shopping online. They want the convenience and they want the timeliness of a delivery on their schedule. Of course, that is in conflict with the need to keep the assets moving all the time. You cannot afford to have a truck sit and maintain the types of margins that we do in this industry. And then, of course, now you put proper driver utilization in tandem with that, particularly now that we have electronic monitoring all over the place, is that you've got to optimize all of those factors together. The back of the envelope route planning doesn't work anymore. You need the algorithms, you need the computers to do it for you because the conditions, traffic conditions, customer expectations are changing constantly.
Yep. If you're not looking ahead, you're behind. Now, before we move on from this topic, I did want to address one of our viewer questions. So we have a question we received from Dave Lusinger at the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. So we have a little bit of a Wisconsin theme developing to this show with paper transport on earlier too. But Dave asks, are private firms willing to share key information from their supply chain and predictive analytics with the public sector to establish the need for infrastructure investments and the need for repairs? So Dave's really asking, what's the opportunity to have some data sharing between trucking companies that are using more sophisticated technology on one hand and state DOTs, for example, on the other. And of course, this evolution of data analytics we're talking about is really geared toward better business operations. But through the course of that, of course, these fleets are going to have even better ideas on where the pain points are, where the infrastructure really is lacking, what areas are most in need of repairs or just improvement and expansion. So I just recommend that you keep a good dialogue with the fleets that are operating in your state. They'll have a great idea of what's happening. They may not be willing to share all of their proprietary information, but there's certainly a common interest and need for better infrastructure across the country. Jack, I wanted to bring you in on this too. What are your thoughts on possibilities for sharing data between the private and public realms?
Well, in the private sector, we've always been very close to the vest with our information. Obviously, we don't tip our competitors off to our little secrets or our problems. But it's a nice follow-on, actually, to the ETA question is we can't do predictive ETAs if we don't know what's going on in the highway system.
Sure.
So we're going to need active interchange of data back and forth. On the converse side of that, we need to be giving more information to the public sector. Where are we finding the choke points? As very graphically pointed out in ATRI's recent survey report on those particular choke points is you're designing infrastructure to perhaps have truck dedicated lanes, which infrastructure needs to be priority repaired to allow trucks to move constantly rather than having things tied up in construction zones all day. And of course, those things are changing in real time.
Sure. And
we need to have a better inter dialogue back and forth between the public sector and our fleets.
All right. Well, hopefully you guys can make that happen. And just as a reminder, you're watching LiveOnWeb's look at megatrends in trucking technology. As we continue, we do invite you to participate in the show. You can email your questions or comments to share@ttnews.com, and we will do our best to address them during the program. So we've discussed predictive analytics, which is a trend that we're seeing today in the industry. But let's also look ahead to what might be the next big trend, and that's blockchain. So you're probably at least somewhat familiar with the blockchain concept by now. I'm sure you've heard about it in relation to Bitcoin, which has gotten a lot of attention in the press lately. But the applicability is so much broader than cryptocurrency. There are many possible applications for blockchain across a variety of industries, and trucking is certainly no exception to that. For those of you who are not that familiar with the concept, a blockchain is simply a shared digital ledger or network that keeps an ordered list of records, and those records are referred to as blocks in blockchain parlance. And really, the whole concept is designed to improve visibility, to prevent errors and fraud, and just have more seamless transactions from beginning to end. So, Jack, I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on blockchain and where it really could make a lot of sense in trucking.
Well, blockchain is not a future event. It's here and now. Many of our companies are working in identifying opportunities to work with blockchain. It's being driven from the logistics side of the house. Very rapidly getting to the point now where a customer in South America can order a perishable product from Korea, for example, and have it delivered within days. And the whole advantage of blockchain is to take the middleman out of the system, where the amount that the intermediaries have to touch decision making, because of the trusted nature of blockchain, where one element of the blockchain trusts another element, and it is a trusted network throughout. As a transaction moves from one part of the chain to another, the handoff happens seamlessly and automatically. There's no one has to make a decision and put a check mark in a box to allow the next phase of the movement. it also has a lot of applications in the maintenance and parts side. That's all future think, but we think that one of TMC's long-term objective is to try to standardize the warranty claims handling process in the industry right now, and I think that's where blockchain really has some great potential.
Okay. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more later, and you know, some of the other ideas that have been floated are, you know, regulatory compliance. You know, you think about Food Safety Modernization Act and all the documentation associated with that. That's something that might make sense on a blockchain network. So we're seeing all these ideas, and we'll see how they develop. But I recently spoke with Tim Leonard at Trimble Transportation. He's their Chief Technology Officer, and we really spoke at length about blockchain. So let's go ahead and play that interview and hear what he had to say. Blockchain has really been a hot topic over the last, you know, year and a half or so within the technology world, and increasingly has also been a real area of focus in the transportation industry. And Tim, it's great to have you on because this is, you know, an area that you have a lot of expertise in. And I wanted to hear from you to start off. You know, why should fleet executives care about blockchain? Why should they be paying attention to it? And you know, what can blockchain do better than today's systems?
Yeah, excellent question, Seth. I think when you look at the opportunities that all of executives has inside the fleet capabilities is the enablement to look at the efficiencies and the proficiencies of the fleets themselves. I think when you look at you know, the low margins that each one of the fleets has, what blockchain uniquely offers is that first class of visibilities. In today's technology, there's not a lot of opportunities that you have to actually see things completely end to end. And when I started working with blockchain 3 years ago, it just became so distinctive that the validation of a trusted data set, completely visible, could enable up multiple business cases that would help produce that opportunities to help take manual processes and actually enablement and process things a lot quicker, faster, and make things transparent, particularly with the relationships between shippers and carriers. So unique application, something that's very distinctive, but at the same time, very dynamic in a way that addresses all modes of transportation capabilities. And we have several business cases we could discuss in this.
Okay, yeah, and speaking of those business cases, you know, you guys at TMW and Trimble have identified, I believe, 54 different business cases that could potentially be transformed by blockchain. So there's all kinds of different possibilities here. Would you care to take us through a few key examples?
No, I'd be happy to. I think, you know, and I'll highlight a few. You're right. It certainly could spend a lot of time going through all of them. You know, I like the cases, for example, around brokerage. Again, I think you're absolutely right in terms of I've been doing this for a while. We've looked at the business cases first, solving problems within the industry. So let's look at brokerage. You know, so a very, very specific example, which is carrier onboarding utilizing insurance verification. What this has enabled us to do is actually work with other various associations. This particular one is an insurance organization that's been set up that enables this hyperledger, our hyperledger, to effectively work with another one. And so why that's so important today is with insurance verification, it's very time-consuming and expensive task for really any size broker to really uniquely identify an insurance policy and then have it connected into a very dedicated ledger that maintains that data set, and all you're doing is getting verifications. And the other thing is it's publicly data that's hosted and maintained, for example, by DOT. So why not join a blockchain that has publicly ready available, design something that could be very specific and enable you to take manual processes that today that take 10 to 20 to 30 hours a month and completely automate them. Another great example, for example, is like within LTL. You know, blockchain applications that track, validate freight classes would be extremely helpful in the LTL capability. So, you know, those are just two of the examples. The one that I really like most is the example around intermodal. When you look at intermodal, the blockchain applications can and will help facilitate in real time a trusted access really around the formations around order documentations, data that can be transformed, data associations with a document where we can help intermodal transportation is, you know, for example, Mexico to United States to Canada. by having these centrally located, facilitated in real time, that intermobile lookup capabilities to track information can be done now in seconds, and that enables us to take this thing and actually attack something in transportation that every executive wants to go after, which is the lack of proficiencies, inefficiencies, which has been one of our Achilles heels in the transportation world.
Sure. And there's also opportunity for some of the most basic of freight transactions, right? Just kind of the RFP and bid process, and direct communication really between shippers and carriers. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. One of our main business cases focused very heavy in looking at something, we know that if you were to walk in the front door of any major carriers and say, hey, I'm going to gut and replace your EDI with my own proprietary code, I think they would kick us all out. But if you could walk into a carrier organization, you could embed the blockchain application foundation right inside of a non-committal transportation connection, like, for example, TMW's Bid Engage product. That then ties in information right into the RFP process. The RFP from the shipper, the carriers to the bid, the enablement of that stored inside of a blockchain gives complete visibility and transparency between two relationships that we want to grow and build together. And by the way, that particular opportunity really is agnostics within a standard itself. So standards don't really have to be completed, but yet we saw one of the fundamental problems on the front end process before the TMS that really provides the opportunities for saving time, cost, and manual tracking opportunities.
Okay. Another area that has gotten some attention as a potential use of blockchain in transportation is vehicle maintenance records. And I understand that you have some experience with that predates your time at Trimble back when you were working at General Motors. And perhaps you weren't calling it blockchain at the time, but it was much the same concept. Can you talk a little bit more about exactly what you were doing there?
And again, you're exactly right. When I started looking at blockchain, this goes back to the first white paper, then my earlier years, particularly at General Motors. When you're looking at the recall situation and enabling us to tie specific records of what was manufacturing to anything that may have been recall, there was scattered sets of data everywhere. That's not any unique problem with any company, whether it's GM or anywhere else. However, what was really unique was I immediately saw the unique identification of a record set that was indisputable, but in a real-time fashion, and it was recordable. This really led me into the fundamental concepts is that if I can store data that is trusted, that no one can touch, that I can make it transparent, and this is what I believe, for example, Mary Barr, extremely one of the best leaders I've had the pleasure of working for, tied together the opportunities to be, we want to expose the information so that we're transparent, but we also want to be accountable to be able to map the data into something that people can readily see and to trust that we will show you the information and that there's nothing behind the hidden door on that. And that's what really started my mind thinking that if this is so important to somebody like CEO of General Motors, this could transcend into the transportation world because it would help build the relationships of trust between businesses like a shipper, like a carrier, or carrier to brokerage. So that really was the foundation of where I started with 3 years ago, and I've never stopped since.
Okay. And we've explored some of the potential, some of the real possibilities for blockchain, and it's interesting to think about all these use cases, but just how long will it take, and what will it take for trucking to really adopt and use blockchain applications, and how far off is this, do you think?
Yeah, and again, I think there's a lot of give and take within the transportation trucking industry. I see a lot of adoptions in other parts of the market itself, particularly in Europe and in China, India and Israel and Dubai. We do have a little bit of an adoption process issue. Do we wait for standards? Do we then start building some items that we learn from? And quite honestly, Seth, I think when you look at the opportunities that we can move the needle in specific areas of manual processes that are being done. You don't affect the very low margins that happen today within trucking. Again, I go back to the example. Let me roll out an application that exists today in production that has embedded blockchain hookups. And this isn't transparent with, for example, our Bid Engage product that enables you to actually do a hook, for example, into a non-TMW TMS system. That's where we wanted to go with blockchain, to be agnostic enough to support individuals, but yet transparent enough to have a ledger that has the system of record of information, starting with an embedded application of blockchain, feeding into the overall unique ledger itself, was the entry point that we felt that it would be less cost effective for our carriers, and then two, it would be less risk for them to try out something that enabled them to see, touch, and feel a blockchain capability. Again, I don't want to disrupt the existing business. I believe trucking utilization is still king today. I don't want to affect the utilization capabilities around anything that I'm doing. I want them to get to trust blockchain, adopt blockchain, but I want to do it in a way, instead of eating the whole elephant, they're eating pieces of the elephant and gaining trust into a new technology that can change the entire marketplace.
All right, welcome back. Next, I'd like to go ahead and address some of the questions we've received on blockchain. So Pete Dillon at Aperia Technologies wrote, when you dissect today's shipper-broker-carrier contract terms and the execution and recourse in the case of breach for those contracts, what are the biggest challenges to implementing smart contracts? So we didn't really get into the smart contract concept much, but basically this is the idea of putting a traditional freight contract on the blockchain, and you can have all kinds of different elements of the contract built into the contract in the blockchain. That could be really every step from the initial bid through final payment. You could have, say, provisions for driver detention time and detention pay, maybe even on-time performance on the shipper side. So you can certainly build a network and build a smart contract to encompass the complexity of modern freight contracts. The challenge might just be to getting everybody to agree to the terms, right? Just getting the shippers and carriers and any other parties who might be a part of the transaction to agree to the same terms and have it all set up on a blockchain network. So Jack, I wanted to get your thoughts on smart contracts and how today's freight contracts could work in a blockchain environment.
Well, Seth, as you exactly said, the transactional nature of the business, if event A happens, payment B happens, handoff C happens, or in the case of maintenance and parts and warranty, if a warranty event happens that is backed up by data coming off of the ECM on the truck, that you may immediately be paid for that warranty item and be sent a new part without any question, because the event matched the contract of the warranty contract.
Right.
So from shipping to warranty to parts core management, the problem is, of course, you have to be proactive in applying the rules and setting up the algorithms. It's going to kind of take the art of post-accident negotiation
right.
out of the system. The lawyers are going to have to be thinking proactively rather than at the back end, and that really is the nature of the challenge of blockchain is defining the terms so that the chain itself now becomes a transactional control point rather than an intermediary.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me also get to another question we received. This one's from Scott Conklin at Dedicated Systems, Inc. How do you feel groups like the Blockchain and Transportation Alliance are going to affect the next few years? And how quickly do you think implementation of blockchain will take place? I'll just quickly suggest that BITA is going to play an important role in developing standards for blockchain. That's one of the key core focuses that they've been discussing, and it's really kind of bringing all the parties together, all the folks in the industry from different sides of the industry together to have this discussion. And I'll ask you, Jack, the same question, and also this question on how quickly you think this can happen.
Another one of those questions, the future is now.
Right.
We're already seeing many readings that I'm doing on this particular subject we're already seeing blockchain being either actively incorporated or being planned from the international shipper community. And of course, the carriers that are more logistics managers rather than pure trucking companies are going to have to interface with that in the very short term. Hence the beta formation is why that's been so rapid, is because there is a very rapid and immediacy push to make that happen. So you're going to have to define those terms, as we said. The contract terms are going to have to be defined in terms of trucking operations from our perspective, because certainly the international shippers are defining it from their perspective.
Right.
And I think that BID is going to be a very busy organization here very shortly.
Yeah, I think so too. It'll be interesting to see how these conversations develop. And next, I also wanted to go back to Peter Kovac of Paper Transport. We also talked about blockchain during our interview, so let's go ahead and play that clip and hear his thoughts. Well, I wanted to shift gears here a little bit, Pete, and talk about another hot topic in the industry. And this is looking a little bit further down the line, I think, but there's certainly been a growing level of interest in blockchain technology and how that might be applied in the trucking industry. And Paper Transport is a member of the Blockchain and Transport Alliance. So I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the potential for blockchain in this industry?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest advantage to blockchain is the fact that it takes out any sort of middleman. That's really the foundational idea behind it, is that you have parties that normally would not have communicated with each other directly communicating and sharing that information. So I think that's why blockchain has become so interesting to a lot of individuals, because current state, just with how many carriers are out in the market, it just created this need to have a lot of third parties involved in order to keep those and keep trusted transactions flowing.
Sure. And with a blockchain setup, in theory, you could have multiple carriers, multiple shippers, all kind of communicating together in kind of a load board environment, right?
And ultimately, that's where we would love to be, right? Is if the shippers were all contributing their loads directly onto a blockchain. The carriers could all retrieve those loads and accept those loads right within the blockchain. You don't have these phantom loads on these 100 different load boards anymore. When you actually accept it, everybody sees the loads accepted and it's done. And again, going back to where we had with the ETAs, is if we can pluck those loads directly off this blockchain and have it integrate directly into our network, that ultimately we believe will make us the most efficient that we can be.
Okay. Yeah, and could you speak a little bit more about this common thread with blockchain? A lot of the folks who really study it say that it could really mean a lot for trust between business partners. Today, of course, it's companies that know other companies and have this built up trust. With blockchain and some of the safeguards of the system, there's some thought that maybe you can trust the system more than just people, and you can see this permanent history of work that's been done in the past, so you can feel confident in who you're working with. Do you agree with that? Do you think that that's blockchain could have the potential to change how trust works essentially in the trucking industry?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you have a large amount of small carriers, that trust is especially important, right? It's nobody's wondering if Schneider's going to show up on time or the large carriers are going to show up on time, right? They have that reputation out in the industry. So it's this small to mid-sized carriers that are really going to take advantage of this new trust model because it's a proven track record of what they have executed. And other parties that normally, again, would not have communicated are validating and saying, yes, this happened, this is a good transaction.
Okay. So we see this potential, and this is very intriguing, and we're very interested in seeing how this might develop. But just how long might this take? I mean, do you think this is something that's years away? And what will it take to for the industry to actually put something like this in place and actually have enough people on board to make it worthwhile?
There's a lot of investment happening in the technology itself, so that the technology is not going to be the lag as far as when it will be become mainstream. It's really going to become the parties involved in the technology actually coming together and building out that network and agreeing as to how it's going to operate. Again, the biggest piece of it is that now you have to have shippers that normally wouldn't talk to each other and carriers that normally wouldn't talk to each other actually agree on a standard,
right,
and implement it. Not only agree, but implement it into their systems. If that were to happen, though, it would be a very different world and it would change very fast.
Yeah, and would you say that we're still kind of in that discussion phase right now, kind of the exploratory phase where, the people who might someday participate in blockchain networks are kind of just exploring it?
For sure, we're in the super hype phase where it's,
right,
blockchain's going to cut your bread and bake your cookies too. So.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how it all develops. I mean, it's I think we're, the industry now is kind of wrapping its mind around it, and hopefully we have some great conversations and discussions, through the Blockchain and Trucking Alliance and Transport Alliance, I should say, and others in the future, and we'll see how this all develops. All right, welcome back. Let's go to yet another question we'd like to address from a viewer. So this is a question from Josh Silverblatt at the Environmental Protection Agency. And he asked, what will be the limitations of the digital ledger? So, we've been talking a lot about the possibilities, what can blockchain do in trucking? He's asking, what are the opinions on what it can't do? So, I think, Jack, as we mentioned before, blockchain works well when you set it up in advance and have all these agreed to terms. So it lends itself to transactions that are at least somewhat predictable. So is that the potential problem for blockchain, unpredictable transactions?
Well, that exactly is the challenge. If you can't set up a rule, if you can't write an algorithm around that rule, then the blockchain is going to be very difficult because it's not really adaptive, because you have to have those trusted sign-offs happen. The certificates have to be exchanged. So you can't exchange a certificate of trust if you don't really understand what it is you're trusting. So hence, the more predictable, the more defined the transaction is, the more adaptable it is to the blockchain environment. The other challenge is volatility, where things are rapidly changing, again, because it invalidates the rules that are there. If you talk, of course, blockchain emanated out of the cryptocurrency world, specifically Bitcoin. When you're talking about financial transactions as part of the blockchain in logistics and transportation, is when does the money take place, and in what form does that take place? Is it a cryptocurrency? And if so, is the cryptocurrency volatile? If it is very volatile, as of course has been Bitcoin recently, the value of that transaction, the contract negotiation that goes along with that now also becomes very unpredictable. So if you're going to make a rate that's going to apply in the profit margins that we operate on, and the margin for error is very slim to begin with. So anytime there is increased volatility and lack of precision on the negotiating side, then the blockchain itself becomes an element of risk.
Sure. So even more factors to consider with blockchain. And if you are fascinated by the possibilities for blockchain and want to learn more, I would encourage you to go ahead and read the latest issue of our iTech supplement. This appeared in the February 12th issue of Transport Topics. You can also see the stories online at ttnews.com and for some additional reading on blockchain. And as a final reminder, you're watching LiveOnWeb's look at megatrends in trucking technology. And you may still have a little bit of time to submit your questions if you hurry. You can email a question or comment to share@ttnews.com. And if you're fast enough, we'll try to address it on the program. But moving forward, let's go ahead and look at another big trend we've seen in the trucking technology world, and that's remote diagnostics, which isn't new, but has been a big development for the industry over the last several years. Today, all the major truck OEMs are offering some form of remote diagnostics, and these systems report critical fault code data back to the fleet proactively while the vehicle's out on the road. So it's not just receiving a phone call that your truck is broken down on the side of the road. It's getting alerts so you can take proactive measures so you don't have this painful downtime and you're not just bleeding money as you're trying to get a truck up and running. So we've seen this and we've seen a lot of focus on it in the industry, but Jack, what's your sense of how much of a difference these systems are really making? Are we seeing a tangible difference in truck maintenance as a result of this rollout of remote diagnostics?
Our TMC members are telling us exactly that. Is, again, we're still in the early phases of the potential for predictive analytics, but even now you're seeing direct payoffs. As you said, the worst thing you possibly could want, especially going back to our predictive ETA discussion, is the last thing you want is a truck with potentially $10 million worth of load in the back is stuck in the middle of nowhere where the parts for the very sophisticated truck are not accessible and not available. And if the system itself can tell you that a part is going to fail, then you're going to avoid that situation. So it's not just analyzing the failure modes on the back end to reduce your maintenance costs, it's preventing the worst case scenario up front. And that can translate into very large sums of money on your bottom line.
Sure, and I'll just add that in the trade press we kind of marvel just how much the truck manufacturers have really focused on this area, on remote diagnostics. It's become a key selling point for vehicle manufacturers, and that's pretty remarkable. We're really seeing equipment and technology becoming more closely tied together than ever before.
If I may interject a little
absolutely.
bit, it's actually because we're seeing more and more sensors. We already have a lot of sensors on a truck, but we're seeing more and more sensors, not just on the power unit, but also in the trailer. You can monitor reefer temperatures, you can monitor axle temperatures, you can monitor a lot of other issues that are going on in the vehicle. And the more and more technology we add into the system, the more data we're going to have to play with. And of course now the analytic programs to go with that, again, are beyond the capabilities of people. You need the computers to predict that failure and to give us a little bit of a warning. Use an example, the old HAL 9000 predicting that the communications control module is going to go bad. Of course, we all know what happened on that one. But more recently in the Watson commercials, where they kind of joke about, can you make a better cup of coffee? And the Watson says, I'm sorry, I don't talk to the coffee maker. Well, that's the whole point now. In the truck, we need to talk to every part of the truck.
Yep, absolutely. It's amazing how interconnected it can all be. And on a related topic, let's talk a little bit about what truck maintenance will look like in the future. TMC, of course, is looking at many ways that technology could change the task of repairing and maintaining modern trucks, including just this use of more sensors to support predictive maintenance. Any additional thoughts on that, Jack?
Our future truck committee, and I keep joking with these guys that the future is not 5 years out, it's much shorter term than that, are working on a lot of conceptual things about types of sensors that may fit better into this predictive environment. Better air brake sensors, for example, that can monitor a slow bleed of air in a triple or a double way in that far back axle before you have a brake overheat and a brake fire and a load fire as a consequence. That one little item to repurpose current technology, not even future technology, to a different utilization can actually have a tremendous payback on your bottom line.
Okay, and we've got a question here from Tom Paduch at Transservice Logistics. He asks, what will the evolution of a technician's role look like in the future considering electric vehicles and autonomous technology systems? And what should a carrier or a maintenance service provider do to begin to prepare their staff for these changes? Jack, of course, this is a perfect question for TMC, so I'll kick this one to you. What could fleet maintenance operations do today to prepare for a future where the job might look a lot different?
Well, I hate to do the shameless advertising, but first of all, come to TMC's annual meeting and exhibition, which takes place March 3 to 5th in Atlanta. We have a technology pavilion where we're going to be discussing all of these issues. We're going to be discussing technician training and virtual reality and all of the other fun subjects that are going on right now. The answer is not thinking about the future, is studying now, because the technologies are coming on us very quickly. Hybrid trucks, electric vehicles are now items, and you're going to have to prepare to not just to be able to maintain them, but also who's going to maintain them, who's going to be allowed to maintain them, and maintain the warranties on the technologies.
Okay, and you mentioned virtual reality, and that's maybe another trend that we could see make its way into trucking more in the future. Not only virtual reality, but also augmented reality. For those of you who maybe aren't fully on top of that. It's simply, what we're really talking about is adding a digital overlay to the physical world. You could do that with wearables like Google Glass or HoloLens, or even just with your phones in some cases. And in fact, for those of you who had kids who were obsessed with Pokemon Go a couple years back, going around with their phones, that's actually an example of what, at least as an example of the augmented reality concept. Well, that fad appears to be over, but perhaps we'll see some applications in the business world, including in trucking. And Jack, this is an area that TMC has been exploring. So what are some of the potential uses for VR and AR in trucking?
TMC's Future Truck Committee and Education Committee have been looking at this for actually quite some time now, and quite far along in exploring the possibilities for virtual reality and augmented reality. And the difference between the two, of course, virtual reality is training without having to have the physical vehicle, the physical device that you're learning how to maintain on hand. That's the way I learned, of course, is working on a real truck. Now, you don't have to work on a real truck. You can work on a virtual truck, but at the same time have access to every system that's conceivably out there. Augmented reality, on the other hand, also allows you to do remote supervision of employees, not just training, but hands-on supervision real time in diagnosing and repairing.
Yeah, so I mean, you think about a maintenance technician perhaps wearing a wearable lens and maybe looking at a physical truck, but having access to fault code data on a Google Glass, for example, or maybe just checking and maintaining the truck, examining the truck remotely from afar. PeopleNet actually did a demo of a concept like that at the last Trimble user conference. So there are clearly some folks in the trucking technology development world who are actively exploring this and considering the possibilities for VR and AR in trucking. Now, just to circle back quickly to blockchain, we did get another question on that topic from Ken Stabler at Ken Stabler Trucking. How can shippers and carriers using blockchain keep themselves protected against collusion lawsuits? We talked a little bit about the need for kind of front-end preparation, but any thoughts on if that's an issue or not, or is that a little bit of a non-issue for blockchain in your view?
Oh, that's a large issue, Seth.
Okay.
TMC, we've been developing standards for 60 years plus, the recommended maintenance and engineering practices that we're famous for. But as equally as famous, although kind of behind the scenes, is the system that goes with that, is the peer review, the avoidance of all types of market discussions in not just the practices themselves, but also discussions that lead into those standards.
Right.
That has got to be a part of the blockchain discussion, because the opportunity to manipulate is always there, and we're setting new ground, so you don't have the long-established, slow-evolving relationships that we've had in this industry throughout my lifetime. You're actually looking at an exponential change right now. So the opportunity for errors, the opportunity for manipulation in the marketplace are real, and they have to be watched for.
Yeah, so yet another aspect of blockchain we should all be considering moving forward. Let's go ahead and get another question that we got from Peter McManus at BNC Chandler Trucking. Peter asks, what are the cost benefits of newer technologies for small and medium-sized carriers? So we've been discussing a lot of different types of IT systems and technology for trucking. And let me just say that it's not just for the biggest of the big fleets. I think in today's environment, you really need to be doing work and being on top of your information and managing information to be competitive today. Increasingly, there are more affordable options out there. There are options for companies of all sizes. Anything to add, Jack, on the possibility for small carriers to also use technology?
Well, I think there's a lot of opportunities. I'll give you a good example right now, I think, is in the area of parts core management. TMC has a recommended practice coming through the ballot process right now that helps to standardize the flow of parts core management and to give assistance, particularly to small fleets, on developing the systems to go with that. Now, where the diagnostics, the analytics that go with that, is those transactions can be digitized, and those transactions can now actually happen automatically without the, and mostly this is a paper transaction at the small fleet level, is without the hand ledger sheets, without the physical checking of the inventory in your back room, and frequently missing parts cores that have expired that you no longer can recover your money from. Real payoffs to the bottom line in a much quicker manner.
Sure. And yet another blockchain question we received. I'll go ahead and get to this one as well. I'm not sure I have a great answer for it, but it is a very good question. What type of computing power is going to be required to validate blockchains and verify transactions? So if you think about a future where freight transactions are increasingly done on blockchain networks, where's the computing power going to come from? I mean, I've heard this raised before. Do you have any insights on that, Jack?
Well, I think it's just the miniaturization of processors is just advancing exponentially as well. I mean, I remember when I first got involved in IT issues from a business perspective back in the 1980s, the x86 chip was there. Now we're talking about the qubit chip. Right. The quadrillion transactions in a chip. And I think the computer power is going to be there. Yeah. It's just a matter of you're going to have to make the purchases as an investment. I mean, your infrastructure costs are going to need to include your computing power so that you can stay up with the transactional velocity that's going to be happening.
Yeah, and I think it's also helpful that we've gone through this move toward cloud computing already, and the possibilities for all kinds of IT systems has expanded with the use of the cloud. So that could help pave the way in some cases for blockchain use as well. Let's go ahead and get to a question as well from Jerry Mead at Phillips Industries. Where do you see the role of a smart trailer in the marketplace? So smart trailer, we talked about all the sensors we see in today's vehicles, and that's not limited to the tractor. It's also in the trailer, and all kinds of cargo sensors, door sensors, light sensors. When does the door open? Is the trailer filled or not? Temperature monitoring. So this idea of a smart trailer is out there as well. Do you see that as an important part of the ecosystem for the industry moving forward?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the trailer is going to be a much more integral part of the system than it ever has been before. It's not simply a box on wheels. It is in itself a data source, as you said, particularly in the area of refrigerated and perishable products. From the security standpoint, has the door been opened? Has the door been breached? And with blockchain, it's a natural complement to it, because if you have the transaction being trusted in a blockchain transaction, you also need to have the physical entity dovetailed with that. So if you have a smart trailer that knows it hasn't been breached, coupled with the automatically trusted financial logistical contract transaction, then you do truly have a trusted network that you can allow the goods securely to move from someplace halfway around the world to your house without a lot of interference.
Yeah, and if you want to track the load, it's not just tracking the tractor, it's tracking the trailer as well.
And more importantly, if something went wrong, who's responsible?
Yeah, absolutely. So this has been a great conversation. We've really hit on a lot of fascinating topics today, but I think that'll do it for today's show. I'd like to thank Jack Legler for joining us here in the studio today, as well as Peter Kovac and Tim Leonard for participating in the program via Skype interviews. If you missed part of the show or would like to watch it again, a replay will be posted later today on our website, ttnews.com, and on liveonweb.ttnews.com. Live on Web will return in April, when we will be discussing the release of TT's 2018 Top 50 ranking of the largest 3PLs in North America. Until then, thank you for joining us.